All right. I think our first talking point from Le Mans is one of our first rider battles. And the first one for this episode is Petrucci versus Jack Miller. Who wants to take this one first?
I just want to clarify something. Is it a rider battle or a rivalry or like a hatred, or like to what extent do we believe this exists? Because I don't think they're friends off the track.
He's trying to take his job, son. That's my money. That's my skrill. Jack Miller is trying to stack factory paper, and the man between him and his wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling stacks of paper, between him and that Ric Flair drip, stands one man, Mr. Petrucci himself.
I feel like no one is actually friends with Petrucci on the grid. Maybe just Dovizioso. Because we've heard plenty of stories about like the other riders that are trying to battle for sixth place getting into it, and Petrucci giving zero fucks.
I feel like Petrucci is like new money, right? Like all these other guys came up through like CV, Italian Federation, 125, 250, Moto2. Here is this plebe, this scrub who comes up from like super stock and then rides a CRT bike and then some, like, remember in Titanic when there's like that one lady and she's like, oh, they don't like her because she's new money.
Yeah,
right? She's like explaining Jack. Basically, Petrucci's like one of those people. He shouldn't even be there. All the rich people know they shouldn't be there. When he tries to talk about like fine wines and arts and going to the symphony, they know he just eats cold pizza and listens to Mac Dre.
So do we, though.
Right, which is why I love him.
It's great.
He's the people's man.
He's right, exactly. He's the people's champion. The main thing between this battle is Jack Miller is also the people's champion because, Miller obviously is, much loved by the more working class crew, the much loved by, the demographic that's, let's see, where am I going with this? Like he's a down home. He's a salt of the earth. Like he's like an Australian redneck.
Beer out of a boot. Yeah.
Yeah, drinking beer out of a boot, man. He's got a weird mohawk occasionally or a mullet. Like, yeah, exactly. He doesn't. He when he wins, the first thing he says is like, "Hey, I'm not an idiot." Like, he's one of those guys. You know what I mean? Like, I hate that like whole presidential thing or politicians like he's the kind of politician you'd want to have a beer with. Jack Miller's the kind of guy that if you have a beer with him, he's gonna want to fight you afterwards. Like, but in a cool way. Like, everyone has that friend that like has one or two beers and instantly thinks he can wrestle and wants to wrestle you on the lawn.
Kev,
come on, man.
How many people do you actually know like that?
Yeah, Kev's my friend that does that.
Yeah, exactly. I don't do that. I get challenged to the wrestling matches, unfortunately.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, that doesn't happen much anymore.
So, but the main thing here to go is that, we know Petrucci signs the 1-year contract with Ducati Core, so he's the factory rider. Miller has the factory GP19 this year, and it's kind of like the pseudo battle for who is going to get it. We saw Petrucci already come out on top of this kind of battle against Scott Redding, if you remember that in-house competition they had for basically who would get the GP, the factory bike the next year.
Right.
So
if I remember correctly on that, Scott Redding choked a lot more than Petrucci did. They both didn't have a great year. It was even so bad that I remember they said we're starting it now in the middle of the season.
After Bruno, after they both crash out or something.
Yeah, and Redding was pissed because he was actually winning at the time.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And then his results before that didn't count.
Right. And so what's interesting to me is that Jack Miller kind of has a large fan base. I've always thought that people kind of put more talent or more hope onto him than maybe they should. Like, it's that old adage, and because of the politics of racing, like if he had the right bike and the right team, he'd be beating Marquez, right? Like he'd be a world champion, or he'd be taking it to him, or he'd be winning races, right? Right? Maybe not. Come on, he couldn't even beat baby Marquez.
Well,
True.
and that actually goes I feel like all that was built up on expectations that were kind of put there by HRC, right? Like he got that contract to move over to the Honda. He completely skipped Moto2, and that just solidified the fact that someone thought that he was a Marquez challenger. And it turns out that no, they might have just been pulling our leg. And then on the flip side of things, right, Petrucci has come through a different path and is has never really been at the top, never had those expectations put on him. So it's kind of cool to see these two different paths coming to literally the same ride and them fighting for it.
And two outside the box paths, which really have like no. You know what I mean? Like Petrucci being a factory Ducati rider is like as totally unrealistic and outside the out of the blue and sort of doesn't make any sense as Braun being king at the end of the series. Like so, but like
that's a pretty good analogy. Yeah,
right. But
it's gonna be Thursday by the time you listen to this. You'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. But so what's interesting to me is that Jack Miller, he kind of draws first blood, right? He gets the first podium a couple of races ago. He gets a third, and everyone's like, and Petrucci's on a couple of sixth place finishes, and everyone's clamoring that like he's gonna get it. He's the guy who's gonna be the factory. He's coming up. You know, remember because we talked about this on a previous episode. Like, well, how come when Jack Miller gets one podium 4 years later, he suddenly is a factory rider, but when Petrucci gets a bunch of podiums, he's not really a factory rider? But what happens after that? Jack Miller crashes out, has a problem, and then Petrucci gets a fifth, I think he had, and then in this race, they go toe-to-toe, head-to-head, and Petrucci counters that first punch, like, you know, with his own two-piece. So it's kind of a true battle in the sense that Miller draws first blood, and then Petrucci responds in kind and leaps ahead in points, and when they go head-to-head against each other for a true test of like skill, tire management, where they're going to be, as Petrucci that comes out on top this time, heading into Ducati's biggest race of the year.
Take it up.
2 points. Yeah, 2 points. One, we haven't made it really to what we usually talk about as halfway is Mugello, right? That's coming up. I believe that's the next round. That'll be halfway.
Well, it's actually only a third of the way.
Halfway in what?
No, it's like the real. But no, you're right. Like numerically, but I mean, like realistically, once you get to Mugello, you generally know who's going to win the championship, roughly. So this year is kind of interesting. But the 2 points I was going to make is one. Petrucci is the second rider on the factory. He is probably the test dummy at the end of the day, right? He's the test mule on the team to some degree. Would we agree?
He knows his place, I think. I mean,
generally the number 2 rider.
Dovi's the clear number 1.
I mean, but that's the whole reason why Miller has the GP19 as well, is so that he can be that third rider that can be a test dummy as well. So I suspect that they're.
So that's where my second point's going. So that's my question.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
But do we know, is Miller actually testing parts or is Petrucci testing parts?
I feel like I haven't actually heard anything about that just yet. I feel like Ducati's being their classic Ducati and just not producing a bunch of shit this early in the season. I mean, we just got back to Europe.
That's where I'm going with it. That's where I'm going with it. Yeah. So usually what we see is most other teams, and maybe Ducati, to your point, is a little bit unique in this sense, is the second rider on the factory team is kind of the test mule. And then the satellite teams generally get last year's bikes. To your point, this is an anomaly because he has the bike. But if he's not getting new parts that he has to keep on learning or adapting to, maybe they're not better parts. Remember a couple years back, they were getting new parts on Yamaha, and Rossi and Maverick weren't going faster because they kept having to change and find new setup, and they were going the wrong direction. So the factory team got worse. Generally, by midpoint, they taper off from that, and say, look, we've dialed in what we've got. Let's ride it out for the rest of the year. And that's when the satellite guys start to fall off. So that's what I'm kind of waiting to see.
I mean, and we kind of talked about that last round too, was that usually the factories get back to Europe and just start to pull away instantly. And that
Correct.
Doesn't necessarily seem to be the case just yet. It maybe the trend is just a little bit slower this year so far. But I mean, we'll find out in the next 3 rounds or so.
Right, but the only thing is you could say the factories is that you normally would have said that the Pramac team would be the closest to the factory, right? Because it's a tight, close-knit factory.
Sure.
They've had a current year's GP bike on that satellite squad for a couple of years now. Maybe you could argue that the Petronas SRT team is maybe closer to the factory at this point. I'm not exactly sure. Right?
We know they have more money.
That's a whole different conversation.
Right, whole different conversation. But the point being is I don't think that there's probably a massive difference between Miller or Petrucci's bike. I mean, I think Dovi has the number 1 bike, and I think we're splitting hairs on number 2. I don't really think you say there's number 1, number 2, but that hasn't really been the case. For a while, we had Yamaha have have two number one riders, so to speak. There's been times where it was very difficult to assume Danny was the number 2 rider. He was more like the 1.2 rider. You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't like he was being sidelined in favor, you know, but
well, they just couldn't get the bike to work for him at all.
Right, exactly. But he wasn't this like clear number 2 in the same sense that you would say like Amir is, right?
Well, or like Cal was doing the bitch work with all the test parts, right?
Exactly. But, you know, the heavy bitch work. But that's a little bit different, I think, because this brings us to an interesting point. Cal's doing a lot of bitch work, and it kind of sucks for him in a way, to come off injury, to make a bike that works for one guy, but works for that one guy so unbelievably that he's nearly, you know, undefeatable.
Yeah.
But if you look at the Ducati, what you see is, what did you see? You saw the Ducati riders go 2, 3, 4 in a close battle of 3 different guys from 3 different backgrounds completely, 3 different riding styles, and they're within a hair's breadth. I mean, they're like so close to each other. I think I don't really think you're seeing Miller or Petrucci do grunt work for Dovi in the same way you could say Cal is doing.
No. Yeah, I'm just kind of calling out what we see as the kind of cliche norm of number 1 rider, number 2 rider on the factory. Then the satellite riders get the old bike, and they actually start out really well early in the season because they get last year's developed bike that hasn't been fucked with, and they don't have to kind of work any kinks out or anything. They literally just get on the bike and go fast. But generally by around mid-year, that speed starts to taper off because the factories, the shit they've been tinkering with starts to mature, and then they go to the next level and they get in the proverbial next gear, and they're off to the races, right?
I mean,
so,
I like how Ducati is the one that kind of bucked that trend, though, right? Like, I mean, Kev said that the third Ducati bike on Pramac has generally been like the factory support, and that goes all the way back to Iannone when Cal like was shitting the bed and they wanted to get rid of him. They gave all the factory parts to Iannone. And they've just continued that. Like, so I suspect that
it even goes back a little bit farther than that. If you remember when Ben Spies made his like strange switch from factory Yamaha to Pramac, that was when they sort of announced that they were going to refer to it as a true junior team. As a
really?
Yeah,
I don't remember that.
I remember it specifically because it was like, why is he doing
That's why
this?
He did it. That's why he did
right,
it.
that was the
rationale.
That was the rationale that despite
for
the fact that
races.
he was on a factory team, right, till his fucking shoulder fell apart along with his bikes. But and coming from someone who's been dealing with shoulder injury now for the better part of 7 months, I can't even imagine trying to ride a MotoGP bike at any kind of professional pace.
Well, so here's a good question for you then on that note. I mean, we've probably beat this dead horse.
How far off topic are you going?
No, not as far as humanly. If I know Everett at all, he's going so far off topic that we're literally. Ev saw me talking, and he's like, "What's west of Westeros?"
Ooh, they don't know. It's that way.
Exactly.
I was just gonna say, if you were the racing boss of factory Honda and factory Ducati, and you could pick and be one or the other, which would you rather? Would you rather be, and which do you believe is more?
We talk about I'd be factory Ducati because this literally has nothing to do with anything, but I have a soul, so I would ride for Ducati.
I feel
you get my point. The championships, like, what's the value of a championship and mediocrity below it, and what's the value of a very highly competitive bike, but that can't quite get to the top step?
The championship, the after party. The championship, the after party. I think that's an easy decision.
Right. And then if you're R. Kelly, it's after party, hotel lobby.
They got Red Bull.
After
They got Red
party,
Bull there,
hotel lobby. It's the remix to Ignition.
They got Red Bull.
Fresh out the kitchen.
I'll stick with my HRC boys.
Wow. Yeah, I don't really know what everyone's talking about, so I'm just gonna pretend that segment didn't happen.
Oh, come on, that was a good question.
I mean, for me, I don't even really understand the question. But
my point is that what you guys are arguing is that Ducati is doing a good job of having a balanced bullpen of riders and equality, regardless of what team you are, to promote the brand as an overall brand from a business perspective.
No, I didn't. We did not say any of that.
That's exactly what he's saying. No, yeah, he's saying we're giving equality to riders even in the satellite teams. Yeah, Honda has generally fucked everyone that's not on their HRC team. That's not Marc Marquez. And
you were correct on that last part. So bringing it back around to Petrucci and Miller is with all all of that jazz in there, I don't think you could actually take a machinery difference right now and discount Petrucci leading Miller by, what is it? It's 15 points at the moment.
15 points. Right.
Yeah. So there is,
even though they're in next to each other. Like
yes,
there's
fifth and sixth in the championship.
From a standings perspective, it's only one position ahead.
It's actually one of the largest gaps in the championship right now. Actually, Danilo's got 15 points up to Rossi.
Right, one of the largest gaps, title over Sexton.
But that's because it's really hard to get points. It's really hard to get points when you get further back there, right? It's 1 or 2 points instead.
Yeah,
of
I mean those
25.
DNFs of Miller are killing him, and that comes into an interesting point because you could those DNFs are dead. You look at Petrucci. I don't have it pulled up, but what does he have? Like 3 6, a 5th, and a 3rd, right?
Yep.
And then Miller's got a 4th, a 3rd, something else, but
And
a pretty
and a 4th.
Right, and then that DNF, and when these guys are on the due to the progressive scale of the points, since these guys are fighting tooth and nail, but in the top 5 zone, right? If you're telling me like, KTM, Red Bull, Tech 3 or whatever, I mean, you only they're fighting for 1 or 2 points maybe, but these guys, the progressive scale means those DNFs are killing them, right? So we see that large gap that he's talking about. And normally what I've said when it comes to results is like, outside of DNFs, it's just podiums. Like if you were to tell me, if Miller were to get a win in a couple of podiums and be less points than Petrucci, who got no wins but a bunch of podiums, that win in some podiums would matter more. Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
After
no one, like when we're talking about championships, no one remembers who got second place. Like you were talking about for this battle between Petrucci and Miller, no one really cares if you got 4th or lower.
Right, exactly. So what we care about is who can get podiums, and I think really the battle between these guys is for who can potentially get that seat is, assuming Alvaro Bautista just fucking swoop in there. If they think shit, we're gonna go one step closer on the weird scale, and we're gonna get a World Superbike champion back on this thing, but. I think that you're looking at who has the most podiums and who is regularly fighting for podiums, and right now it's a dead heat.
Well, and if they kept this going throughout the season, dead heat, same number of podiums, then you just stick with Petrucci because he's already in this slot, right? Mm-hmm. You don't.
Right.
You're
Why
not
make
worried,
another change?
Yeah, and you're not worried about Miller like going off to another factory or riding for a different satellite team and challenging your top 5 position in the championship. Because it's Jack Miller, right? We're not talking about another Marquez level talent here that's going to take that next step. So I mean, I think that's one of the main things that Petrucci has going for him right now is as long as he can match Miller's results and not pull a Iannone and punt Dovi, he'll be fine.
But this is one of the things for me, going back to exceptionally dope. This is one of my favorite things about this season so far, because here's why. For the past few seasons, we've had the same storylines that never change. Yamaha and Rossi, can he win? No. Or Maverick, can he fix his problems? Not really. Right? Or can anyone challenge Marquez? Not really. Can Dovi take the next step? No. You have all these stories that don't change. Right? Yeah. Like we're stuck on a Dance of Dragons and it's been 8 years. Yeah, guys, the series just ended. If you think that's the last Game of Thrones series I'm going to make, y'all can eat a dick. But so all these storylines are just stillborn, dead in the water. Nothing is fucking changing. You watch, at this point, I'm just like, you know what? I don't care anymore. I'm not going to complain. I don't give a fuck. I don't care. Like, someone call me when Maverick does something. Someone call me when Valentino does something. Like, I don't care anymore. Give me cool, new, interesting storylines. For 7 years or however fucking long we've been doing this stupid fucking podcast, I've been saying the number one part about these things is the storylines. Here's an actual storyline with intrigue that's happening. We have 2 new players fighting for one spot, like new rivals,
newish,
new fight,
newish.
For each other.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, right, like,
yeah.
They're two from totally different backgrounds,
yes,
with totally different storylines, basically fighting for a coveted seat, a race-winning capable seat, and they're battling it out. And look what you had happen. Like we said, the same thing. Look what happened when they did it with Petrucci and Redding. It totally sucked. But look what happens when they put Petrucci in the factory bike. They put fucking Miller on the factory bike, and they say, "Hey man, dangle the carrot. Whoever wants that spicy fucking meatball, go earn it." and they're fighting tooth and nail for that shit.
Well, and it's like part of the reason why the Petrucci versus Redding sucked is they were a little bit further back where we didn't care as much.
Bunk team, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, whereas now we literally just talked about how the guy that gets more podiums is probably going to be the one that takes the seat.
But hold on, isn't this really not comparable? If you're Miller and you're roughly doing the same thing, and you're on the quote unquote inferior team with the same bike, and probably still that means the inferior bike, shouldn't you give him by default if they equal out?
That's what we just said. It's not inferior. Were you listening 10 minutes ago?
You brought that up. You brought it up.
My point is it's inherently inferior team.
It is. You're correct. The team is inferior. But at the same time, I think the thing that will override if they get the same number of podiums, like everyone will know that Miller is on an inferior team and Petrucci should have got just that many podiums, if not more. But they're still going to give it to Petrucci because getting a new rider in a team to learn the new technicians and stuff just isn't worth it for the same results.
Generally, you got to beat them. Yeah, not just equaling is not impressive enough.
And Ric Flair for 80 fucking years said to be the man, you got to beat the man.
Yep.
Right, exactly. It's always the one thing that Miller has going for him is he's chasing, whereas Petrucci is trying to maintain. And conceptually, whenever you look in fight sports, whenever you look in these kind of things, it's always harder to maintain your seat than to chase it because the motivation isn't the same. Miller's going to have to fight tooth and nail, blood, sweat, and tears. Petrucci, tooth and nail, blood, sweat, and tears to keep what he already has.
I got a good T-shirt idea.
Yeah.
Quick.
It's gonna be like a boxing T-shirt where they're facing each other, and it's gonna say, "To be the man, you've got to beat the man," and then
right.
That's not a bad idea. Black and white, like
old timey
boxing photo, like bare knuckle.
Yeah,
like Queensberry rules, man. 125 fucking rounds. You knock the guy down, he falls up. That's a new round. Queensberry, bare fucking knuckle. They fight like this and shit. So bam, son. Miller will be just like in that movie Far and Away. He's Tom Cruise.
That's a good one.
He's the scrappy fucking pale skinned boy, and then he's gonna say, "He's a goddamn Italian, and I want you to spill his blood."
Oh boy, got a new storyline here.
That's a fucking good movie too. I mean, it's a terrible movie, but it's a good
one of my
movie.
favorites.
That's a good storyline.
It's terrible but fun.
All right, we're gonna round this one out here with something we're absolutely terrible at: a prediction. We're not gonna go all the way for the seat and the championship and stuff. No, we're just going for the next round.
Petrucci.
Next round?
Home round, bro.
Mugello?
It's Mugello. There's no way.
He's good there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You could, if you asked me Phillip Island, it would say Jack Miller, and goddamn, bro might win.
Right.
And bro might win.
But
yeah,
ain't no way.
Conditions.
Right. If it's like tricky conditions is one thing, but if we're talking about a nice, sunny Tuscan day, if me and Diane Lane are sipping fucking Pinot Noir, looking over under the Tuscan sun, and Petrucci versus Miller, Petrucci all day long.
All right.
It's not gonna matter.
I have a hard time.
It could be rain or shine. It's Petrucci. I'll bet a lot of my hobo bucks.
Yeah.
So many hobo dollars.
And can we further that prediction for end of year on the topic?
No. We will revisit this topic at a later date.
Rob, always ruining my fun.
No, we're so bad at predictions. You don't want to jinx yourself at this point anyway.
I'm pretty good at predictions.
You got that one over me.
I just keep on picking Marquez. That's all I keep doing.
That too.
Tech 3, that was it.